I think most of us are very sensitive to the fact that we are immersed in a pagan culture. And it's really rather fascinating to look around us. In fact, it's a startling discovery if you start doing a little bit of homework and discovering that how much of our lives, the labels to our days of the week, our months, go back to Roman and other pagan traditions. I think most of us that have done any research at all, of course, know that Christmas is in fact deeply immersed in all kinds of Babylonian and other pagan traditions. The Christmas tree itself originated from ancient tree cults. The term Druid, may surprise you, originally referred to a priest of the Occult. The custom of kissing someone under the mistletoe can be traced back to Druid beliefs that sexual potency and other things reverence for that plant. Easter, I think most of us probably realize that Ishtar was one of the goddesses of the Babylonian religion, and the golden egg of Astarte was a fertility symbol, originated in fertility cults. And if you understand the symbol of the rabbit as a symbol of fertility, you can understand how both eggs and rabbits became symbolic of these ancient pagan fertility cults, and that's how you get Easter bunnies. I mean, you ever wonder where you get bunnies that lay eggs? You know, that's sort of a strange idea that we sort of take for granted in the various practices and games that are played around that time of year. The practice of sending Valentine's Day cards goes back characteristically to a licentious Roman feast called Lupercalia. Birthday cakes may have derived from offering candles and cakes to Artemis, an ancient Greek goddess of the moon and the hunt. The custom of giving out cigars at baby's birth may come from ancient Mayan fathers who would blow tobacco smoke toward the sun god as an offering of thanks for the newborn child. Our childhood tooth fairy, strangely enough, goes back to attempts to hide physical items from practitioners of voodoo who would use such items for their curse rituals and so forth. The idea of June brides is related to Juno, the Roman goddess of marriage. Most aspects of the American wedding ceremony can be traced to ancient pagan customs, including the bride's white dress and veil, the exchanging of wedding rings, and the father giving the bride away. So there's all these, many of these ideas go back to pagan issues. And with that sort of candid survey of the culture in which we live, once a year, we as Bible-believing Christians get confronted with a particular pagan celebration that should be giving us some difficulties. And that is, once a year we face the dilemma, the problem, the burden of dealing with a holiday called Halloween. And it's obviously very easy to shrug this off as just another one of these quaint vestiges of days gone by. But it's interesting. I thought we would tonight explore a little bit on some of the background that will relate to decisions that you're going to have to make this year again. The celebration of the pagan festival of Halloween is now a $2.4 billion market, merchandiser's dream. Over 50% of Americans will decorate for Halloween as compared to 80% for Christmas. It is now the third most popular party activity, following only the Super Bowl and New Year's Eve. Halloween is big business. And I wish that was where it ended. It's always a difficult time, especially for Christians, and especially those with children. How do you deal with this? I'm also going to suggest that it's also a very dangerous time, because many of the seemingly harmless involvements that tend to get associated with Halloween can be entries, the technical term used by some, for entries of the occult. And some of these things can prove very tragic for the unwary. It's interesting that you could easily make a list of superstitions and strange ideas that were extant during the days of ancient Israel. What do you suppose would be the penalty for someone who ran around the camp of Israel arguing that the world is flat? Probably nothing. You and I could probably conjure up a list of superstitions or weird ideas that were a symptom of ignorance or being uninformed that were apparently would be dismissed as harmless. But if you were involved in something that smacked of witchcraft or astrology or necromancy, trying to communicate with the dead, what was the result in the camp of Israel? Death. Death. It was a capital crime. It's interesting that God didn't set those rather severe punishments for ignorance, but rather to protect them from tampering with something that was dangerous. I thought it would be fruitful for us to spend a little bit of time taking a look at the roots, the background of this holiday that is relatively recent as an American holiday. And actually, the background of Halloween starts in ancient Britain and Ireland, the Celtic festival of Samhain. It was observed on October 31st, which was the end of summer. In Cornwall, it was called Allantide, of apple time. In Ireland, it was known as Gimbret. November 1st was the new year in both Celtic and Anglo-Saxon calendars, and the date was connected with the return of the herds from pasture, and the laws and land tenures were renewed at that time. It was one of the most important times of the year in the Celtic culture, and yet we'll also discover it was also one of the most sinister times of the year. The Celts were the first Aryan people who came from Asia to settle in Europe, settling in northern France and the British Isles. The Celtic people engaged in occultic arts. They worshipped nature, ascribing to it supernatural or animistic qualities, very much like your federal government is enforcing in the schools today. You might reflect on that as we go. The ancient Druids were a priestly class of the Celtic religion. Many of their beliefs and practices were similar to those of Hinduism. In fact, there's some very fascinating echoes throughout the Celtic religion of what we know today in the Hindu beliefs. They taught reincarnation and the transmigration of the soul. That people can be reborn as animals. That was a very common thought. It's a common thought in Hinduism. It's also was a common theme in the Celtic religion. Now, according to Julius Caesar and other sources, the Celts believed that they descended from the god Dis, which is the Roman name for the god of the dead. It's interesting that the Druids and the Celts venerated memory very highly. And as a result, they left relatively modest, very hardly any, written records. Most of what we know came from the Romans, which did a great deal of documentation of these strange people in the British Isles. One of the things, just to give you just a flavor of some of this, one of the things that was very dominant among the Druids was human sacrifice. Now, we read that very glibly, but until you get into the background, you haven't got a glimpse of what was involved here. According to the Roman historian Tacitus, the Druids covered their altars with the blood of their victims, often criminals, if they were available. According to Caesar, human sacrifice was a common and frequent element. In large cages, scores of people were burned alive at once. The larger the number of victims, the greater the yield of the crops, was the thought. According to Lucan, a first-century Latin poet, 3 Celt gods in particular were hungry for human souls: Tutatis, Essus, and Tyrannus. The struggles of the dying victims were held to contain predictions of the future. The Druids had full confidence in sacrifice, human sacrifice, as a method of divination.